Hello and welcome. Today, we're diving into a really unique and, let's be honest, pretty controversial philosophy about relationships. It's all built around a Korean concept called naejo, and it presents a pretty radical view on personal responsibility and what it really means to be a partner. It's definitely a challenging perspective, so let's get right in and break it down.
So, it all kicks off with a question that I think we've all asked ourselves at one point or another. Why is it that we sometimes feel completely unseen or disrespected by the people who are supposed to care about us the most? Well, the philosophy we're digging into today offers a very surprising and, for a lot of people, a really tough answer to that question. All right, here's our game plan for unpacking all of this. First, we're going to define that core concept, nejo. Then, we'll get into why this philosophy says self-respect has to come before anything else. From there, we'll look at its really unusual partnership model and its, let's just say, controversial theory on why communication breaks down. We'll even get into a mathematical formula for who's to blame, before we wrap up with the ultimate path to self-improvement.
Okay, so to make sense of any of this, we've got to start with the one word that frames this entire philosophy, nejo.
So the term is nejo, and traditionally it describes how a wife supports her husband from inside the home, setting him up for success out in the wider world. But the philosophy we're looking at takes this old school idea and totally reframes it, giving a radical new meaning to what that support actually is. And that modern twist, well, it all starts with a really powerful, non-negotiable rule. Before you can even think about supporting a partner, you have to build yourself up first. This is the absolute foundation of the entire idea. The core message here is just incredibly direct. It says, stop wasting your time and energy on people who don't respect you. Your number one job isn't trying to change them, it's to turn inward and focus on what you're capable of. And according to this view, that is the only guaranteed way to make your life better. And this is the fundamental rule, the cornerstone of this whole philosophy. Any issue you might be having in your relationship, that's secondary. Your primary, absolute duty is to your own personal growth and self-cultivation. Everything, and I mean everything, is believed to flow from that. So you might be asking, how does this intense focus on yourself even work in a partnership? Well, the source lays out a really specific model. It's not about doing things together in the traditional sense, but about growing on parallel tracks. Now, in the traditional version of this model that the source presents, the roles are very clearly gendered. The husband's job is outer work, career, social status, and that's linked to yang energy, active, external, building things. The wife's role is inner work, studying, self-cultivation, developing wisdom, and that's linked to yin energy, receptive, internal, nurturing. The whole idea is that you have two very different kinds of growth happening at the exact same time. But the goal isn't for these paths to stay separate forever. No, the idea is that once that outer work has led to success, the partner who did all the inner work now has the wisdom and the insight to become a true partner in operating that success. It's kind of like two specialists who've been training separately, now coming together to combine their unique skills when the time is right. Okay, and this is where the philosophy gets its most provocative. It takes that partnership model we just talked about and uses it to explain why relationships fall apart, and even offers a really specific theory for why infidelity happens. So here's the chain of events laid out in the source. A person succeeds out in the world. They're now operating on a totally new level. They come home wanting to talk about it. But if their partner hasn't done the inner work to equip themselves with the wisdom to understand this new reality, a massive communication gap opens up. According to this theory, they just can't connect anymore. So that person goes looking for someone who is equipped. And this is the philosophy's conclusion, stated in pretty blunt terms. In this very specific scenario, finding another partner isn't framed as a moral failing. It's seen as a practical need, a search for a compatible operator. And the responsibility in this view is placed squarely on the partner who didn't do their required inner work. So, given that incredibly controversial take, how does this philosophy actually assign blame for this so-called failure to self-improve? This brings us to what is maybe the most memorable and, frankly, wild part of the whole argument: a mathematical breakdown of responsibility. So if a person is seen as responsible for not equipping themselves, who's responsible for that failure? The answer we're given is probably not what you're expecting. This philosophy lays out a 40-30-30 split.
It argues that only 40% of the responsibility actually lies with the individual for their own ignorance. A pretty staggering 60% of the blame gets placed on outside forces, 30% on social and religious leaders, and another 30% on society as a whole.
Now, the really crucial point here is that even though the individual has the biggest single slice of the pie at 40%, the majority of the blame is externalized. The argument is that leaders have failed to teach people how to do this essential inner work, and that society as a whole has failed to properly value it or guide people toward it. So, if 60% of the problem is supposedly out of your hands, what in the world are you supposed to do? This brings us to the final and most actionable piece of advice from the source.
And the message is beautifully simple. Forget the 60%. Just forget it. You can't control society. You can't control its leaders. The only thing you have any power over is your 40%. The path forward is to take total, absolute ownership of that 40%, your own ignorance, and dedicate yourself to changing it. So what does this inner work or study actually look like? Well, the source is really clear that it's not about passive stuff, like just showing up at a service or playing a round of golf. It's about the active, intentional pursuit of wisdom, really learning how the world works, how other people work, and most importantly, how you work. And the promise that comes with all of this is a really powerful one. This philosophy claims that by focusing only on your 40% and truly committing to that self-cultivation, you will find your place in the world and never be left behind or disrespected again. So it's a complex and for sure a very challenging philosophy, one that puts this huge value on parallel, specialized growth. It really leaves us with a big question to chew on. Whether we agree with this specific model or not, what is the work, inner or outer, that a truly modern partnership actually requires from each of us today?